Thank you. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of The Safe Space. We hope everybody is having a good week. Happy Friday, Junior. My name is Brandy Lowry, and I'm a staff attorney with Lone Star Legal Aid. Before we get started, I would like to read our disclaimer. This presentation is intended to serve as legal information and does not replace legal advice. Contact Lone Star Legal Aid at 1-800-733-8394 or go to www.lonestarlegal.org for more information on legal assistance. Today's episode, we'll be talking about trauma-informed services for survivors. And we have two wonderful guests. And before we get started, I'd like them to introduce yourselves. Scott, please let everybody know, introduce yourself to our audience.
My name is Scott Heaton. I'm the Director of Legal Services at Family Abuse Center in Waco, Texas. We are a full-service domestic violence program. We have shelter, legal services, children's services, counseling, and a housing program.
Thank you for being a part of our show today. And Elise, welcome again. Welcome back for being a part of our Facebook Live. Please reintroduce yourself to our audience.
Absolutely happy to be here. My name is Elise Grissmeyer. I'm the Associate Legal Director for the Cabrini Center for Immigrant Legal Assistance. We are the legal department of Catholic Charities for the Archdiocese of Galveston, Houston. We're a large social services organization. And here in our legal department, we do a free or low cost immigration legal services for the immigrant community of Greater Houston.
Well, thank you again for being a part of this Facebook Live. As I stated earlier, we will be talking about trauma-informed services for survivors. So let's just dive right on in. And this question is open to both of y'all. What is trauma? And whoever wants to go for first, go ahead.
Ladies first.
Absolutely. So I do want to start by saying that I am a lawyer. I went to law school. I am not a mental health professional. So any information I give here is just what I've learned from 10 years now of working with survivors, what I've learned from my personal experience and research. This is not coming from someone with a clinical or psychology degree. But what trauma is something that results from a set of circumstances or an event in someone's life where someone perceives a danger to themselves and has a reaction based on that. So the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration defines it in terms of event, experience, and effect. That something happens in your life, a circumstance, an event, your experience of that, your individual perception of that can result in long-term effects on the way you, on your individual functioning, on your mental, physical, social well-being, and the negative outcome of that is what we call trauma.
Scott, you want to piggyback on that, or?
Yeah, just to add that in the context Elise was talking about is like a single episode. When it's repetitive, then you talk about complex trauma.
So then basically trauma can last for a life. So one single thing can cause trauma or several things can cause trauma. So then, right. Well, so then this is, I want to take this back onto like more of, and I don't want to say personal, but I guess professional experience of what you see, because we asked about what causes trauma. And of course, none of us have that psychology background. So from the clients that you deal with, what do you feel like, what are some of the traumas that have been caused in some of your clients, Elise?
So I'm an immigration attorney, and for the last 10 years, I've been working as a staff attorney and supervising attorney in our Crime Victims Assistance Program. So all of our clients either have experienced directly or have had immediate family members who have experienced a significant violent crime. So our most common types of cases are domestic violence, sexual assault, human trafficking. We also have some kidnapping cases, aggravated assault, aggravated robbery, but generally very serious crimes against the person. And like Scott mentioned, a lot of these are kind of single event instances, but some of them are really prolonged, long-term repeated acts of violence against another person. So for our child sexual assault cases, for example, those could be a single instance, but they could also be long-term abuse that happened over the course of several years.
And then Scott, what have you seen, that can cause trauma within your clientele?
Well, as we are a domestic violence agency, the overwhelming majority of our clients are domestic violence survivors. There is an intersection between domestic violence, trafficking, and sexual assault where we have two other nonprofits here serving our service area. That one is an agency called Unbound that works with survivors of trafficking, and another is an advocacy center that works with victims of domestic violence. And so those are the three big ones. But of course, any of us can experience a traumatic event through something like a natural disaster or just simply being a witness to a violent act.
I think that would definitely cause me trauma. If I see that, it would definitely cause me trauma. And actually, like had experience being in Houston, Harvey had the trauma because that was my first hurricane ever in life. So yeah. How can trauma affect a survivor after the traumatic events?
Well, there's a lot of different ways that trauma can work its way into our lives. And I think it's important to say too that trauma is not a universally identical experience, that we each handle trauma in different ways, and our experience of that traumatic event can vary widely. So Brandy, you mentioned Hurricane Harvey. That's a really perfect example that some people may have gone through the exact same experience in that hurricane, but may have internalized it really differently. The same is true for car accidents. One car accident for one person might be a really traumatic incident. They might internalize a lot of fear and anxiety and internal tension because of that event, where someone else might have had an entirely different experience. So I think the after effects of trauma are likewise tailored to the individual, that we walk away with different changes to our mental and emotional well-being that can vary anywhere from nothing at all the way through PTSD, anxiety, and depression, and kind of long-lasting undercurrents. One of the really interesting parts about trauma research is they've done long-term studies about the effects on our physical and mental well-being, especially after childhood trauma. It can set us up potentially for long-term negative health impacts. So people might show a tendency towards coping mechanisms that are unhealthy, like overeating, indulging in unhealthy sexual behaviors or risky sexual behaviors, self-medicating with drugs or alcohol, which can put us at risk for health concerns. But it also increases the likelihood that we'll be diagnosed with cancer, and the likelihood that we'll have a heart attack, and all of these underlying and long-running health risks that are really can be tied pretty directly back to trauma in our childhood.
Well, I can just add that, kind of a big picture way that trauma can affect a survivor is it can impede a survivor's daily functioning, which can affect a survivor's relationships, can affect their work and the totality of their life in a negative manner.
We've definitely seen some of that too within, assisting our clients. I know sometimes, trauma can affect some of our clients when you're trying to prepare them for trial or, prepare them for a hearing, because having to relive it or speak it again can, have them shut down. They will completely shut down and then get very non-responsive. So trauma can definitely affect them in that aspect as well.
I've seen that a lot in trial preparation, but also not only in just their affect and their behaviors, but also in our clients, we see a lot of impacts to memory after trauma, especially for our clients that have had traumatic brain injuries or head injuries of any kind. That sometimes trauma affects the way we remember events. It doesn't necessarily remove our memories. It just makes recall harder, and it makes working with clients a little frustrating as an attorney sometimes, not because anything is their fault, but as attorneys, we're trained to really laser in on specific details, and we like everything linear and chronological and organized. And sometimes trauma just prevents people from recalling memories in that way. So I have really had to kind of unlearn a lot of what I learned in law school about questioning witnesses and about interview techniques because it just doesn't leave space for that.
Right. That is so true.
And I want to add that there's a controversial, I say controversial, but there's a theory out there that says that trauma can actually alter a person's DNA. And then therefore that trauma can become generational trauma because that DNA is then passed to the next generation and the next generation. So if anyone's interested, you can do some Googling on generational trauma and DNA altering and things of that nature.
I'm interested. I'm gonna Google it. I'm definitely gonna Google it. And I guess this kind of goes into well, we kind of, oh, I'm sorry. So does issues like poverty and racism influence how trauma can affect a person?
Absolutely. And
Oh, go ahead.
well, I was going to say I can expound upon that. So this brings up the concept of intersectionality. And so where there's an intersection of multiple things going on, like a person can be a member of the LGBTQ plus community, they can be a part of the BIPOC community, which is a relatively new term in my experience, but some people don't really like the term, but you know, we get to identify however we want to identify as individuals. And the BIPOC, to be precise, it stands for Black, Indigenous, and People of Color. And so one of the things how racism can I mean, yeah, poverty, racism, and all these other things can impact a person is it can be a lack of resources. It can be a lack of societal supports. It can manifest itself in a variety of different ways.
That's good. This is the first time I heard about BIPOC. So you taught me something. Like, you taught me a new terminology. So what are some other things besides race and poverty, and usually just in your profession, that can probably cause trauma, like that can affect trauma? I mean, we know, you know, poverty, racism, domestic violence, you know, like what are some other things that maybe, you know, you've seen with your clients or clients that came in, they probably expressly have stated, and that causes their trauma?
I don't, yeah, a lot of these things we're talking about, poverty and racism, can really set up scenarios in which people experience kind of layered compound trauma and just make people more vulnerable to repeated acts of violence against them. And I think that absolutely happens. So poverty, for example, like you were saying, Scott, not only can cause uncertainty and instability in our home lives, especially as children. Food insecurity is a big one for people living in poverty, but it also makes it more likely that you witness a violent crime, experience a violent crime, have crime happen in the family, something like all these risk factors that up the potential that you will have traumas visited on you, especially in childhood. One of the common risk factors that we see in my agency, because we're an immigration agency, we work with a lot of undocumented or temporary status individuals in the United States. And we've seen that to be a big risk factor as well, that if you're undocumented here, for example, and you're working for cash, you're missing a lot of the workplace protections that a US citizen might be able to have available to them. So we've seen a lot of workplace sexual assault, workplace violence, and people don't feel like they can be empowered to understand and use their workplace rights because of their lack of status. And I think sometimes perpetrators can use these perceived vulnerabilities to their advantage. So there was a police officer who was sentenced a few years back from the Houston Police Department who was intentionally seeking out undocumented women to sexually assault them. And it's not only that being undocumented makes it maybe more likely you would experience workplace violence, but it also makes you maybe an easier target for someone who wants to choose a victim who's less likely to report the crime. So he wound up assaulting, I think the final number was between 8 and 15 women, several of whom were represented by Catholic Charities, but that was an intentional choice on his part. The perpetrators like him will see someone who they think is less likely to seek justice, to make a police report. And just by nature of being undocumented, it can make you higher risk for trauma.
I just want to list off a couple of things I've jotted down here under this question is culture can compound the effects of trauma. A person may be residing in a culture, an undocumented person, like you said, but it can be a particular culture, says, well, we don't talk about these things. For example, it can be a person's self-identity, can be a lack of education in general. Undocumented persons oftentimes have a fear of law enforcement. Other populations have fears of law enforcement. Media can influence it. And this may come across as controversial, but I think it's historically accurate that we live in a patriarchal society, and the society in and of itself can compound trauma because oftentimes the dominant in group may not take the matter so seriously, as may not affect them as much. And one big thing is a group of professionals that aren't trauma informed, that know nothing about it. And I'm one of those people that come from a background where I was a professional, but we weren't a trauma informed agency, and I wasn't a trauma informed individual. And not having that awareness can compound the effects of trauma.
I definitely like what you said, where trauma can be compounded with just sweeping them under the rug, because a lot of cultures, will refuse to talk about it, and that can harbor like a long-term effect of trauma. Because if something happened to a child and they tried to tell somebody, or they was like, oh no, leave it alone, just don't talk about it. So yeah, that can definitely affect somebody.
I think that's absolutely right. One of the key indicators of whether someone is going to have resiliency, whether they're going to be able to come through trauma and find healing and peace on the other side of it. One of the key kind of pillars of that is, do they have both individual and societal support? Do they have faith in systems that will catch them on the other side of this trauma? Do they believe that their family, their friends, their immediate support group will believe and trust what they're saying and support them as they recover? But also, do they have faith that they can go to the police? If I go to the police and report sexual assault, I have a feeling, based on varying levels of my own privilege, that I will be taken a lot more seriously than perhaps one of my undocumented clients who walks in at 17 years old and reports a sexual assault, who has limited English skills, who doesn't have a social security number here in the United States. And that's absolutely the case. Our perceptions of how systems will support us on the other side of trauma plays a big role in our own recovery. So absolutely, I think understanding where we can do better in these systems to make them more trauma informed will help everyone recover from trauma a little easier.
I think I would be remiss if I didn't also include legislation. Legislation can compound the effects of trauma. Right here in Texas, where the three of us reside, the Attorney General recently released an opinion on trans youth, and the governor supported that opinion and has put in, I guess, an administrative order, basically, of how certain state agencies are to respond to that. And so trans youth is a particularly vulnerable population, and you can probably draw an analogy to other vulnerable populations and how there's a fear of reporting, and society doesn't have the appropriate supports and things of that nature. So legislation and administrative rulings, attorney general's opinions can compound the effects of trauma.
And actually that goes into our next question, because it was, I was going to say, well, what does trauma response look like? But we've hit on that. Trauma response looks like where people are not going to want to report because they don't feel safe. They don't feel like they're comfortable enough to report, and they don't have anybody to go to. Because when you have legislation that is not backing you, or, law enforcement that you feel like is not going to protect you safe, then you just internalize it and deal with it negatively. It comes out wrong. It can come out, like you said, at least self-medicating, so you don't want to feel that trauma, or lead to something even worse. So yeah,
one thing I will say about the trauma response is, you're right. I think it comes out in a lot of different and surprising ways. But I think one thing we should say, and I will say this is not a mental health professional again, is that if you have experienced trauma, the best thing you can do is just address it and handle it with a qualified mental health professional. That we sometimes have this feeling where if I can just like bury it down deep and distract myself with drugs or alcohol or work or relationships or faith or anything that might not be destructive in and of themselves, but if we're just burying our trauma and trying to avoid it, it's going to come out physically, emotionally, mentally, in our relationships, in our work, in our home life. It will come out. So it's so much better to kind of work through it with someone who's qualified to support us while we handle that, because otherwise it can creep up in anxiety and PTSD, but it can also creep up in dissociative episodes. It can creep up in memory issues and sleep problems, health problems, emotional problems, all these things. So best to, again, with support, with someone who's qualified to work through those.
And there are definitely a lot of services out there that provide free mental health counselors and things like that. Because we do not want, again, my favorite saying, we don't want you suffering in silence.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll say it towards the end again.
And I'm not a licensed clinician, but there are clinical responses to trauma. There's 4 general responses that are widely accepted. But if you look in some of the literature and some of the Googles, there are 5 and some are 7. But the 4 that we pretty much operate under here at Family Abuse Center is the fight response, where you want to engage in pure self-preservation at all costs. The freeze response is where instead of running, the flight response is where you just want to run. The flight is where you want to run. The fight is where you want to engage in pure self-preservation. The freeze response is where instead of running, you just pause. And the fawn response is where the person will engage in trying to make the other person happy to neutralize the situation or to prevent it from escalating.
Okay, so when you mean by like fight, break that down some more. So self-preservation, what is that? What is an example of that?
Well, let's say a person has been in a relationship where there's a cycle of violence that occurs over a period of time. There's an escalation phase, there's the violence phase, and then there's the honeymoon phase. And eventually over time, that honeymoon phase disappears altogether and it just goes straight to escalation. And then, so over time, a person may, instead of just taking the violence, they may resort to violence in turn as a trauma response to the trauma that they've encountered. Or it could be that the person's having a nightmare, for example, and the person, a spouse may try to comfort them, and they awake just long enough to swing a punch, and that's a fight response.
I think one important thing to remember about these responses is that sometimes your body reacts before your brain. That's what these trauma responses are. And over time, especially with repeated trauma, our body loses the ability to distinguish between actual life-threatening stressors, triggers, and non-life-threatening triggers. So another reason to kind of seek help and seek treatment for these things is, the classic example is PTSD in soldiers who've seen combat, right? It's the reason that fireworks are so distressing is because for their body sees life-threatening thing. Their body reacts in that way. So our brain kind of snaps into action to protect us. It's a learned response to stress because our body has learned when loud, bright things happen, we need to react because that is threatening our lives. And it's the same thing with repeated trauma, and any stressful situation can be a trigger for that. So I find when I'm having a conversation with a client, if they perceive criticism or attack from my part, even if that's not my intention, even if we are having a very, to me, normal conversation in the office, if they feel threatened, their immediate trigger reaction can be anger that is disproportionate to this conversation that we are having. Anger in that fight response because they're reacting to a barrier, they're reacting to a stressor, and their body has officially taken over their brain. So when we as practitioners are trauma informed, we can learn strategies to avoid that kind of trigger for our clients, but also ways to de-escalate a situation and ways to help co-regulate someone through that extreme response and bring them back to bring them back to the conversation that we're having.
So that actually segues away, and we kind of talked about this a little bit, but how can a person's trauma impact their ability to navigate in life?
It's hard to navigate life when our body can take over like that, when we're having trauma responses to everyday things. And this is not to say people who have suffered from trauma can't function. Sometimes trauma does affect our daily functioning life, and sometimes we can work through it pretty well, especially with help. But I think trauma colors the way we perceive events sometimes, so that we react in ways that aren't necessarily predictable because our brain can take over. Trauma reworks the pathways in our brain to a way that we don't have those predictable responses sometimes. But I think it can affect us in every way, in our relationships and in our faith and in our work and in the way we respond to others.
And specific examples are sleep disturbances, substance use disorders has been previously mentioned, mental health diagnoses, anxiety, PTSD, reactive attachment disorder, anger outbursts, as Elise just mentioned, and those trauma reactions that I just talked about, fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. Anything that impedes our daily functioning, that's, how trauma, can impact our ability to navigate life.
Can just take over. So what are some of the ways, well, Scott, you actually mentioned this, but like, what are some of the ways the legal system re-traumatizes clients? Because, you brought up legislation. So, that can re-traumatize, especially, different orders that have been passed down. But what are some of the other things the legal system can re-traumatize clients?
Elise touched on this earlier, I think a little bit is, go ahead, Elise, I interrupted you as your mouth was open.
That was just a sigh of where do I start? So please.
Because I was thinking in my head, I'm like, well, I mean.
Yeah. So I'm going to give a broad thing, and I'm going to give a little bit of an example, specific example. So the biggest one is forcing survivors to repeat their stories over and over and over again to this detective, to that prosecutor, to this advocate, across the whole spectrum of services. And I'm aware of a specific young woman that I worked with as a probation officer in a former career who was a trafficking victim herself, but she was actually prosecuted under the theory that she didn't do enough to help another trafficking victim that was younger than her. So the system traumatized her, that's just a specific example, but that may be because the prosecutors in the case weren't trauma informed themselves.
I have questions about that.
Let's talk later.
Well, it actually relates to this, and just to chime in real quick. So how was she able to get through that? That's what I wanted to know. Like, how was she able to get through that trauma? Because she became a prosecutor. So, she became a probation officer?
No. I was her probation officer.
Oh, okay.
She was placed on probation, but she was a victim herself.
But then she was re-traumatized and she was prosecuted. Okay, I'm sorry. I thought she became a probation officer. So
I'm sorry. I didn't articulate that clearly enough.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I still have questions though, but we'll talk about that offline. So what are other ways that the legal system can re-traumatize clients?
I think in every legal system we have in this country that I think people go in with expectations, especially when they are the injured party, when they are the survivor. They go in with expectations maybe that things will be easy, or things will be designed for them, or things will be that at the end of the day, there will be a just result. And one of the hardest parts of being an attorney working with survivors is helping them to understand that's not the case. So you may be 100% right. You may be 100% a survivor, but I, as your advocate, am never going to guarantee you that you will get the result that you want. And it is not fair. And the system is set up to kind of put people through hell in order to get to the end of the case. So my answer is a little bit different on specifics if we're talking about the civil justice or the family justice system versus criminal justice system. My own expertise is in the immigration system. And I will tell you that even when Congress does great things, even when Congress, as they have, have created these remedies specifically to protect immigrant survivors of crime. In practice, in theory, these are supposed to be Band-Aid measures that step in when someone has survived a crime here and protects and tries to restore people to some semblance of health and brings their family together and gives them support. But in reality, what it means is our clients are put through a really rigorous discovery process, and more than anything, they're required to wait. So the realities of our system is that someone who survives a horrendous crime still, even if they meet all the requirements, they have to wait 7 years for their case to be adjudicated. And it's just outrageous that we expect people to kind of put their lives together on their own on the hopes that this will work out 7 years in the future. So in so many ways, our system is not set up to be responsive and efficient and fair, just in the daily practicalities of it.
And consider that the Violence Against Women's Act languishes in the Senate right now for reauthorization. Imagine being a survivor of some traumatic event like domestic violence or domestic violence and you're undocumented, and the government that you are hopeful that will protect you doesn't even see you as worthy of passing legislation in a timely manner.
Yeah, agreed, 100%. And I also find it especially infuriating when systems, even systems that are designed with survivors in mind, don't take into account the very kind of common and predictable ways in which someone struggles after a traumatic event. The example I can think of is that certain kinds of cases I work on punish you essentially in the system and disqualify you if you don't seek a remedy immediately. The longer you wait, the harder it is to win. When in reality, we know that if someone has just escaped a trafficking situation, for example, their immediate priority is probably shelter and safety and mental health services and food and kids and custody and all of these other more important things than seeking immigration relief right away. And yet somehow, even with that very predictable response from trafficking survivors, they're still punished in a system that's designed in theory to protect them. It also is true of victims who struggle with alcohol or drug issues and dependency issues or mental health issues or criminal episodes or anything like that we understand are more common after someone survives trauma. It's a way we're trying to cope with what we've been through. And yet somehow, even understanding that the research says that that is likely to happen, we still punish survivors that go through those experiences.
As a probation officer, 3 out of 4 women on my caseload confided in me that they were victims of sexual abuse as a child or sexual assault as a teenager or an adult. And the men, I don't have any statistics on that. This is all anecdotal, but I don't have any statistics on the men because they simply wouldn't talk about it. Yep. And one other thing I want to mention on this subject of how the legal system re-traumatizes survivors is a lack of humility. As an agency, we believe that clients are the experts on their own life. And so when a practitioner has a lack of humility and we don't recognize that person as the expert of their own life, then that can re-traumatize the client as well.
This is very good information. Who is most vulnerable, or is there a such thing as like one population is more vulnerable than other in trauma?
Boy, that can open up a can of worms.
Because we don't want to open up that can of worms.
Yeah, but you have, and generally in any society, even when in a society like India, for example, where the society is comprised of all one race, there are still layers and hierarchies and castes, and so then that implicit in that is then there's a more vulnerable population.
Right. So that's
examples.
Oh no, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Examples here are, like I said earlier, BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, and people of color. Whether a person chooses to accept that term or not, that's their choice. But if a person identifies as BIPOC, I'm going with it. Members of the LGBTQ plus community, the elderly, the disabled, the undocumented, children, anybody any person that doesn't have the same real or perceived access to services. Sorry, Elise, if I was too
No.
comprehensive, but
Just exactly what Scott said, everything he said. But I think it's exactly that, the people who don't have the same perceived social capital to have faith in the systems that are set up. So, but in a less specific way, anyone who doesn't have the individual supportive individual level systems and societal level systems. So all the groups that Scott mentioned who don't navigate the systems we as a society have set up with the same ease as other people, but also people that are not supported on an individual level are vulnerable to trauma as well. But I think those two factors go into who might be more vulnerable to trauma. But yeah, everything Scott said, yes, cosign.
So we have mentioned this word a lot. We've said the word trauma informed. So let's explain to everybody, what does that mean? Like, what is actually trauma informed, and what does it kind of look like?
Trauma informed is an approach to the provision of services that assumes it's more likely than not that any client seeking services has experienced trauma, and that we should design systems, approaches, our offices, our services in a way that takes that into account, that serves in a way that first we're trying not to re-traumatize or visit harm upon the client seeking services with us, but also acknowledging the role that trauma can play in bringing someone to us seeking services in the first place.
in a former life, I was an athlete. I actually ran track and field and cross country collegiately at Sam Houston State University. But an old coach who I hate that I never got an opportunity to play for him. He retired when I was in 7th grade in my little town. He was the Tom Landry of our town. His philosophy was the first rule of coaching is do no harm.
Mm-hmm.
And the first rule of advocacy, the first rule of professionalism in any field you work in is do no harm. And so to be trauma informed, take that into account first and foremost. The first rule, do no harm. But there has to be a systemic approach throughout society. There has to be an agency approach, and there has to be an individual approach. And we need to go from a shift of what's wrong with you to what happened to you. And so there are some 4 basic principles. Realize the prevalence of traumatic events and the widespread impact of trauma, recognize the signs and symptoms of trauma, respond by integrating knowledge about trauma into policies, procedures, and practices. And again, that has to be throughout society, agency level, individual level, and seek to actively resist re-traumatizing. And, you know, the way that occurs is be very cautious in, you know, coming from my legal background as a probation officer, and, you know, you all as attorneys, you want the facts and you want the chronology as Elise stated. And oftentimes we aren't careful in how we ask those questions. But dealing with vulnerable populations, you have to really retrain your brain, as Elise stated, to ask questions in a manner in which they aren't going to re-traumatize the person.
Yeah.
So that's my mini TED talk on being trauma informed.
My mini TED talk on what I've learned in interviewing and working with survivors is exactly that, that those of us with power to kind of set policies for our agencies and control some of the ways our agencies go about providing services. It's important we do that from an agency level, like you were saying, but even on an individual level, just we as service providers, or us as humans really, the way we provide trauma-informed care here is to kind of meet clients where they are and to center their life experiences and not expect that every client is this one-size-fits-all kind of case. And we want to empower clients. A lot of trauma is feeling like you're suffering from lack of control, right? Like something happened to you that you couldn't control, that you couldn't stop, and you're suffering from the effects of that. Where we can provide a place to safely do the opposite of that, that's what we want to do. Where we want to say, here's information, we're here to work with you. Tell me about you, tell me what we can do for you, and have the client be actively engaged and collaborative in the process of their legal case. That we're not, they're not coming into me and I'm saying, I'm your lawyer, here are the 3 things we're going to do. I'm not accepting questions at this time. Instead, we can say, I want you to feel like you have a say in what's going on. Let's talk through this together and form a strategy as a team. but giving them autonomy and power in that process, and a voice where they've maybe been missing one before. But I think we as a legal profession, as social service agencies, that we can do so much better at that. And like you said, Scott, this sometimes starts at the very tippy top, that maybe we need to push for legislative action that puts in place policies in larger systems that take these things into account as well.
So then in what ways is this different, like building the trust with the trauma versus advocates versus lawyers? Like, for instance, with Scott, when you're dealing with trauma, like trauma informed and with your clients, like Elise said, you know, sometimes lawyers, we come in and be like, facts. But how's it different with advocates versus with lawyers?
I don't know that it necessarily has to be different. I think if we're talking about trauma informed, it may look exactly the same. It should look exactly the same, because we can still get the information, we can still get to the facts, and we can still get to the chronology. But it's how we go about it. You know, there's multiple paths to take to the same destination sometimes. And I've just kind of jotted down a couple things here: to be present and be an active listener. If I'm meeting with a client and I'm constantly looking at my Apple Watch and I'm checking notifications on my phone and I'm looking out the window and all these sorts of things, that client's not going to trust me. I'm not present. So we have to be present and be an active listener. Elise talked about how she's not going to come in and say, okay, here are the 3 things we're going to do, and have the client co-sign. She demonstrated humility by saying, this is a collaborative effort. So you build trust by empowering that person. And one of our core values here is we believe in client self-determination. So if a client says, what would you do? We never say, this is what you should do. This is what I would do. Because we believe we are to empower them to make self-determination, and recognizing individuals are the experts on their own lives. Recognizing that all responses, and I don't just mean a verbal response, it could be a nonverbal response, but all responses are valid unless an individual is engaging in behavior that's harmful to themselves or others. So if a client's in my office and they're cussing and they're screaming, as long as they're not harming themselves or harming others, it's a valid response. And when a person can be their genuine self in your presence, that builds trust.
I usually allow my clients to get it out. And then once they're done, I was like, how do you feel? You know, you feel good? Because I love empowering my clients, you know, because I'm like, let it out, you know. And then I tell them, I was like, nope, I don't think you got it out. You know, come on, I think you have more in you. And then they'll just like release. And I was like, okay, how do
They didn't teach you that in law school, did they?
They didn't teach me that in law school. And then once they're done and they step back and then they start apologizing, I'm like, well, what are we apologizing for? There's nothing to apologize. You needed to get it out. This is your platform. Get it out. I said, get it all out. And then I said, now we are courageous. We are strong. I said, let's go tackle the world and let's like get this case. And like, you know, I said, let's win. And they usually, you know, they feel better because they've been holding it in for so long. And they have been re-traumatized. You know, they feel like they've been re-victimized because they're telling their same story and over, and nobody's either present for them. You know, they'll probably dismiss them or blowing off. So when they finally have somebody that they are learning to trust and that is willing to help them and is giving them platform to be like, okay, I can be free and be myself. But yeah, law school definitely did teach it.
and not to knock law school, but they're just like, we have a lot of interns from Baylor University here, being in Waco, and it's great experience. We had 2 clients that had severe mental health episodes within 2 days of one another. And, you know, the experience of interns learning about that and witnessing it and things of that nature just is invaluable to them going forward as social workers, primarily the majority of them, because they're not capable of necessarily even if you watch a YouTube video in a class, it's not the same as being in the building where the building is locked down and you get an all staff message on the phone system, stay in your office.
And that's why we always say about the practice, life experience, profession, it's about practice. And I like when you brought up social workers. So should we be connecting clients with I'm tongue tied, social workers or other service providers? Because like for us, we have a wonderful social worker, Ashley Comier. Like I know sometimes when I feel like, well, I take a step above. Like when I have a client or even when I'm dealing intake, if I feel the need that they need counseling, I automatically send them to her, like automatically. Even if we may not be able to, to assist them in their case, I'm still like, I feel like this person needs some type of help. And I tell them, I don't want you to be stuck in your trauma. I want you to heal. I want you to come out of it. So let me send this referral and see what services she can provide. So like, I'm sorry, Elise, go ahead.
No, I have so much to say about this, but absolutely. So it is really, it's impossible for me to ask someone to focus on filling out an immigration questionnaire when they don't know where they're sleeping that night and they're worried their kids are going to be taken from them and they don't know if they're going to have food tomorrow. So I think when we're talking about providing trauma-informed legal services, that this has to be a key component of it, that we are attuned to their needs. We are actively asking them what we can do to help connect them to services in the community. And whenever possible, providing that warm handoff to those services, not just handing them the paper, but also saying, hey, here at Catholic Charities, we have a food pantry. Can I give you the address for that? And they're expecting you tomorrow morning. But we actively encourage people to seek mental health services while they're working on their case with us, because of all the things we just talked about, that when I'm preparing a case for immigration, I have to ask a lot of really hard questions and I don't want to re-traumatize you. And even if I give it my best effort, I have to kind of poke at some emotional scabs there. And I want them to be supported while they go through this horrendously unfair and drawn out process and in a system that's not set up to serve them like we've talked about. I'm also not a hypocrite about these things, that I will openly tell clients that I am in counseling myself, and I think everyone should be. And I think maybe that's a tiny way that we can start to promote a healthier society and better systems, is just to talk about our own mental health struggles without shame and openly. That if we are open with one another, that maybe we can destigmatize a lot of these struggles.
Yeah, we need to totally eradicate the stigma around mental health treatment. Yesterday, I spent 32 minutes on a virtual meeting similar to this. It's a local child fatality review team. We participate as an agency in that, and I'm the designated representative.
Wow.
And when you hear of a 12-year-old girl getting run over by a bicycle, a 12-year-old girl on a bicycle getting run over by a car because the sun's blinding the driver and the girl didn't yield to the stop sign. You hear of a 16-year-old girl jumping off of a cliff. I mean, those sorts of things, they eat at you. And we as practitioners, we have to take advantage of the mental health help that we can get. And it would be hypocritical of us not to take advantage of that.
Yeah.
My answer is exactly mirrors yours, Elise. Absolutely, you should be referring to other service providers. There may not be a legal or ethical obligation to do that, but I certainly believe there is a moral obligation. And I believe as an agency, any agency that works with survivors of trauma is negligent, not in the tort sense, but negligent. And I'm so happy to hear, Brandy, that Lone Star Legal Aid has a social worker on staff, because that is being trauma informed to the fullest degree. And so we can't be negligent when addressing our moral responsibilities. And individually, like it was stated, I may not can help a person specifically within our guidelines, our grant funding structures and those sorts of things. But if somebody calls me, I'm going to plug them in with something to help them, even if it's not our agency, because I may not have an ethical or legal obligation to do that, but I believe I have a moral obligation to help that person, even if I don't get credit for it on a report.
Absolutely. I also like what you said, Scott, and it's become kind of my personal refrain here with my colleagues as well. But looking out for secondary trauma for ourselves is absolutely crucial. This work can be really gut-wrenching. We're all here because we want to help, and we're all here because we really want to make a difference in people's lives. And our clients are incredibly resilient and strong and incredible, but being there every day and witnessing people's pain can be really, really emotionally draining, and that we owe it to them, we owe it to ourselves to not only seek mental health treatment, but to look out for signs of secondary trauma in ourselves and our colleagues and our teams, and making sure that we're here for the long run, not just temporarily here in the fight, but also have the strength to do this for the long term. But yeah, if any of my colleagues are out there listening, I say it here too, go to counseling, take care of yourself. Self-care is important. Don't burn out.
And I want to just mention, how can the legal, one of the questions, I don't know if we necessarily address it directly, but how can the legal system better respond? Mandate training. Any agency that works with people, period, should be trauma informed, in my opinion. So as a probation officer in a former career, we had kind of like a mental checklist. Did you pay your restitution? Did you pay your probation fees? Have you used any drugs or alcohol? We went down the checklist of conditions of probation, making sure the person was in compliance. And sometimes we got so caught up in trying to determine if the person was in compliance that we weren't seeing the whole person. And so those 3 out of 4 women on my caseload I mentioned, and when I worked with felony only substance use disorder clients, it would have been so helpful to me if I had had training early on in my career, an annual training on how to be trauma informed, because I'm sure inadvertently, out of ignorance, I re-traumatized some clients over the years. And just because that person was in the system and they had committed an offense and been placed on probation doesn't mean they're any less worthy of the dignity and respect of being treated from a trauma-informed framework.
And that's why platforms like this, again, is so important, because we are able to educate the community on trying to be trauma-informed and provide trauma-informed services. So I thank y'all both. Did we miss anything? Do we feel like, I know we can go on and cover so much, but we are kind of getting towards the end. So is there anything that we want to recap or want to make sure we focus on anything? Did we take care of everything?
I think we took care of everything. I think it goes back to what you said, Brandy, is that I hope that if anyone listening has been through something traumatic and they're feeling like they have to just bury it down deep and never think about it again, that maybe this is your call to call up a counselor. There's free services in lots of different cities, low cost services as well, that they should go find someone to kind of help them through that struggle, that there's no shame in going to a counselor and saying, here's some bad stuff that happened to me. Can we talk about this? That we've all done it here and absolutely recommend it to other people, that there's no need to struggle.
I wholeheartly believe in counseling and therapy. Like, at least I have a therapist too. So yeah. But at least where can somebody, if they need to reach out to Catholic Charities, how can they reach out to Catholic Charities?
Absolutely. So we have a website, catholiccharities.org, O-R-G. And we have a lot of different services. We have counseling services here. We have food pantries. We have basic needs support. We have a legal department. We have so many different things that we do in the community. Please do go to our website if there's anything we can do to help. If anyone would like to volunteer or their time or their money with us, please do. It's on our website.
And Scott, how can they reach your agency if somebody needs to reach out?
FamilyAbuseCenter.org. Family Abuse Center, all one long word of the 3 words combined. And we have an ongoing need for volunteers. We have an Amazon wish list. We have an ongoing need for financial contributions, just like Elise's agency does. We cover 8 counties in Central Texas: Limestone, Freestone, Falls, Ellis County, Navarro County, Hill County, Bosque County, and McLennan County. So we have some urban and some rural. And generally, most Texans are going to be within a reasonable distance of a domestic violence program that can offer them assistance. We don't just work with clients that are in our shelter. We work with clients that we consider outreach clients. So I also provide direct advocacy services in addition to being the director of legal services. So that may require me to going to a rural area meeting with a client at a neutral location like a police department or a public library. So if anybody finds themselves in a domestic violence situation, and when I say anybody, I didn't say any woman, I said anybody, because it can happen to anyone. You're generally going to be in a coverage area where you can get services. And Google the, I don't have it pulled up in front of me, but a person can Google the National Domestic Violence Hotline, and they can refer you to your nearest domestic violence program for services and supports. And most agencies are grant funded, so these services provided to the client will be at no cost to them. So we have a counselor and 2 counseling interns, which is drastically reducing our wait list. And that's services are provided completely free of charge to the clients.
And a good thing about these websites too, they're also safe. So, you know, if you're on the website and you are in a home with your abuser, I know that on some of the websites, including Lone Star Legal Aid, there's like an exit button and it can clear the history. So if they try to go back and check your history, they will not be able to see that you're seeking help. But like I say, after every Facebook Live, do not suffer in silence. If you know somebody who is a victim, please reach out. If you are, please reach out. We want to try to save everybody as much as possible as we can. So do not suffer in trauma, do not suffer in silence. And as always, if you need legal assistance, you can contact Lone Star Legal Aid at 1-800-733-8394, or you can go to our website, LoneStarLegal.org. And again, we are a safe website as well. Thank you both for being on our Facebook Live today. It was very informative. I've learned some new terms and some new phrases, so I definitely appreciate that. So we don't have anything else. We are out. Everybody enjoy their day.
Can I just throw in one more thing real quickly?
Absolutely.
There has been a rise in articles I've seen on media sites about the use of Apple AirTags and other tracking devices designed to track items. They're being used to track people. There is an agency out there to give survivors more information on this, and it's called stopstalkerware.org. And the co-founder of the organization is a cybersecurity expert. And so abusers are using this technology, and predators are using this technology to track potential victims. So yes, stopstalkerware.org. So just because that's on my mind, that's something that we're trying to focus on here, is helping our survivors with more electronic defenses, because you brought up the safe websites that triggered a thought in my memory about that. So
that's good to know. I need to Google that as well. That's good to know. That's good. That's good information. So, well, thank you again. And we like everybody enjoy your weekend, and we will see y'all next month.
Thank you.